spoken to half of you on the phone probably already, but yeah, thank you all for coming. I know you're very excited to see Geddy, so I'll be quick. The format of the night is that there'll be a 30-minute chat with Phil Wilding, and then there'll be a 15-minute Q&A after that. I know probably all of you have questions. We won't get them in the 15 minutes, but we'll try and do as many as possible. There will be ushers either side with microphones who will run round. Phil will conduct that and point you out to the audience. Pardon, sorry?
Ushers or rushes?
I'm not sure, ushers, I think. After that, we'll be doing the signing, so Geddy may leave the stage just like 5 minutes while we finish setting up. We'll be doing the signing row by row, so A, B, my colleague Paul, who's around, will be helping that. Basically, you'll come down this side, get the book to the right page. This page here, we will help. And we'll give you a post-it note to write your name on, so there's no errors with spelling or what have you. Queue down this side, Geddy will be here, we'll do a signing. Myself and colleagues will be available to take your phone off you, so you can have your phone ready when you come up here. We'll take a photo. Once the book's been signed, it is a very glossy book and the ink does need to dry a little. So once you've got it signed, we'll take you straight over here. And the book does need to stay for like 5 to 10 minutes to dry. So yeah, once the sign's done, we'll bring you up row by row, and we'll help with more questions then. So now, we may have a couple of extra copies to sell, by the way, if people are interested. Again, my colleague Paul, who will be bringing you up row by row, make yourself known to him, will be limited to one per person. I think we've got about 20, it's just remains of people that didn't show, what have you. So anyway, without further ado, I'll bring on Phil Wilding, and he will introduce Geddy Lee for you. Thank you very much for coming again.
Of course you bloody are. Show of hands, how many bass players? How many women? Fight the power. Shut up. How many guitarists? Oh, he won't like that at all. Anyway, as the gentleman just told you, I've forgotten his name, but he's so keen. Geddy will be out in a moment. We'll have a chat for half an hour. You'll get your chance to chart, and then we'll sign some books. How does that sound? One last question. Best Lush album?
Hold your fire!
Clockwork Angels! Moving Pictures!
Hemispheres!
Right answer. Well then, would you like to meet my favourite Canadian? Don't tell Neil or Alex I said that, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, Geddy Lee!
Dancehouse, I have to make a serious announcement. There will be no dancing.
Yeah.
There will be no dancing.
We love you, Geddy!
That's all right.
Love you, Geddy!
Thank you. I love you too. We're sitting.
Yeah, well, old man was sitting down. Wow, light, whoa.
Yeah. It's a theater.
Anyways, we were, I don't know, I don't do this. So we were on the way up, and when we weren't falling asleep on the plane, because we're men of a certain age, we were asking, we were talking about the last time you played in Manchester. When was that?
I think it was Clockwork Angels, no? Yeah. See, they remember, I don't.
Shall I ask you guys? And when was the first time you played? Shush, I'll beat you.
I think the first time was 77. June of 77.
Anybody at that? Wow. Look at these people, they're insane. So have you had a look at the book yet? Do you like the book?
Yay!
So let's start with the book. So a couple of years ago, we were somewhere, probably in a bar, and you said to me, I'm going to write a book about basses. And I laughed and said, no, what are you really going to do? How do you feel it's gone? I mean, now it's there, now it's out in the world. Are you happy with it? Do you love it?
Yeah, I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It was a labor of love. Obviously, it became a big passion for me to tell this story. And in a sense, a justification for my insanity at the same time. You know, when we first started this collecting business with the electric bass, you know, I realized that as I was looking for information on the history of the instrument, and there was really no beautiful book that showed how fantastic these bits of mid-century, you know, art are, really. I mean, they are instruments, but yet in another way they're fine examples of what was going on in the 50s and 60s in terms of sort of commercial art. I thought there were a lot of nice books about guitars, the 6-string variety.
Ooh.
But I just felt like my instrument wasn't sort of done justice. So
Yeah.
as my disease set in, and
It is a disease.
and the volume of instruments got larger and larger, I said, I think we have to do something here. So
Tell these people, Geddy, for shame, how many bass guitars you have.
oh, Phil.
Come on.
Okay, so I'm up to about 280 now.
See, it wasn't just me.
There are 250 in this book, and they're pretty much all mine. But it's really not about the volume, it's about the variety and the story of the electric bass, which I think is really interesting, and at least it was to me. And as I did more research and as I collected more variety of instruments, I found that the story was quite, you know, it was really a parallel to the development of modern music in a way, but from the bass perspective. So, you know, just to backtrack a bit, what got me going, originally I had no interest in vintage instruments.
That's the thing I think a lot of people don't know. You only started collecting basses a few years ago, didn't you?
Well, yeah, about 8 years ago now.
Yeah. So imagine if you started when you were younger, you'd have about 4,000.
I would have been kicked out of the house by now. What happened was in around 2012, we were in rehearsals for Clockwork Angels tour. And I think it was just before the Hall of Fame thing happened. And we were in LA, and some music store approached me about, they wanted a bit of Rush gear, and they were willing to swap a vintage Fender precision bass, like from 1953. And in those days, all I cared really about were instruments that were tools for me to develop my sound. I only had as many instruments I felt were useful in creating my musical identity. So I wasn't a collector of these things, so I thought, well, what am I going to do with an old bass? You know, I'll never use it. But it had planted a seed, so I looked the bass up, and then I started reading about the early years of electric guitar and bass, and I realized I knew so little about the instrument that I'd held in my hands for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And so the more I read, the more curious I got, and as I say in the book, when I get curious about something, it's kind of a dangerous
It is
word.
maddening. He has a room in his house which is just all baseballs. Generally, it's all baseballs and the seat.
They don't know what baseballs are.
Yeah, they
It's an American thing.
We have the internet here now, for God's
Oh,
sake.
okay. I forgot about it.
Just go back to the bass a second. One of my favorites is that one of your favorite basses, though, you bought in Kalamazoo in a pawn shop.
In a pawn shop.
Yeah.
My
Tell
number
us
one.
that story.
Okay, well, so I had a day off in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and
Never go there.
no, we were playing lovely Wing Stadium in Kalamazoo, and my tech at the time, Skip Gildersleeve, he used to go on days off. He used to go pawn shopping. To, you know,
Not what you think. Then again, it is Skip. It is what you think.
And he would look for old instruments. So I didn't do that as a rule, but I was fairly bored that day, and so I went along with him. And I walked into the shop, and there was a jazz bass, a black jazz bass hanging on the wall. The guy wanted $200 or $250, you can't remember exactly, but no case.
Yeah.
And I said, I never had a jazz bass. I'd never even played a jazz bass before. So I bought it for fun, and I hung around the shop for a bit and trying other instruments. But I kept that bass for quite a while without actually ever using it. I think the first time I used it was on the Moving Pictures album on the song Tom Sawyer, and which many people think is my Rickenbacker, but fooled you.
Wasn't that the moment though? Because you said you couldn't get the sound you wanted on Tom Sawyer, so
Yeah.
you picked up the Fender Jazz, and that was the genesis of that moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tom Sawyer was one of those songs when we were recording that was difficult from the get-go. Like, Alex had a hard time getting a solo that he liked, getting a sound for the solo. We had a lot of problems with the recording desk. It kept breaking down. It was like one of those songs that wasn't meant to be, yet it sort of conquered, and it is to be. So it was to be. Anyway, that was the first time I used it on record, I think. And I think I also might have used it on Vital Signs, but I can't recall because I'm old.
It was a long time ago, Geddy.
Long time ago.
Long time ago.
Anyway, so when this guy offered me this 53P bass, I said, finally I relented. I gave him something, from like the collecting dust part of the stage. And I had this bass. And then I said to my tech, Scully, I said, wouldn't it be cool to have a bass that represented all of my heroes, like an EB3 like Jack Bruce used to play, or a Hofner like Paul McCartney played, or an old 4001S like the great Chris Squire played. And most of these guys, may they rest in peace. So that's how it started, just a modest collection. And before I knew it, it was spilling over in my studio, and I was finding all these bits of historical information. I was finding all these nuances about the instruments themselves. But I was also gathering stories about the people that played those basses before me. And not a lot of them were famous players, but they were what I call weekend warriors, or real people, normal people, that loved music, loved playing, and so they would do their day job or whatever and get the rocks off on the weekends or once a week at pub night or something. And so a lot of them were instruments owned by one person for over 50 years. And when you looked at these instruments, they showed how much they were loved and how well they were used.
Yeah.
And there's sort of two kinds of collecting. There's the people that want the pristine, what we call case queens, different meaning than you're thinking, but
Like bone chopping with two meanings. Two meanings.
and they're the road warriors. So I thought part of the point of this book was to show not only the evolution of my instrument, but also the collecting madness and the two different types of instruments that people collect, the pristine ones and then the ones that really, in my view, have a lot of mojo. So that's sort of how the whole project got going, and then 2 years later, voila.
Ding. You fall on your foot, you'll know about it. But your first guitar was actually a guitar, wasn't it? It wasn't a bass, it was a guitar.
Yeah,
Palm sleeves on.
like many bass players, I started as a guitar player.
Yeah, take that home with you. Yeah.
In Canada, we say nobody wants to be a bass player, just like nobody wants to be a goalie. you get told you're the bass player. So that's how it happened with me. I was playing in a little band, sort of. And we weren't yet at the garage band stage. We were at the in some guy's bedroom stage. And
There's a time.
the bass player in the band, his parents thought we were bad influence, so he was not allowed to hang around with us. So they had a quick vote, and boom, I was elected as the bass player.
When did you get your first bass then?
Now you're stretching me. I guess I was about 15.
Yeah.
And I begged my mother to loan me the $30 or $35 I needed to buy this Kenora Japanese-made bass, which I bought. And one of the first songs I learned was a song called 2120 South Michigan Avenue by the Rolling Stones, a Bill Wyman part. And if you could play that in my neighborhood, then you were cool.
You were king of the world.
Yeah, you were cool. Yeah. And so when it came to do interviews for my book, one of the people I really wanted to talk to was Bill Wyman.
Bill, yeah.
Not only because he was one of the first, influences for me, but also because he's sort of living history of rock and roll. And he could talk about what it was like in the late 50s, early 60s if you were looking to buy an instrument. What were the music stores like, you know? And such a fascinating cat. And I really had such a great time talking to him.
Yeah.
But it was very hard to keep him on track.
Yeah.
He's so interesting. He's written like 9 books, and he's a butterfly photographer. He's an amateur archaeologist. He invented his own metal detector. Yeah, because he said, you know, like he does with basses, you know, he says, well, you see, I've got very small hands.
Also, this is Geddy's English accent. It's all qualified. Whoever's impersonating in the UK, this is the accent. I thought you know the song Camera Eye on Moving Pictures? Of course you do it with English fans. There's a bit in the middle of that where somebody goes, hello, Gav. Ladies and gentlemen, there it is.
It's not true.
It is.
It's not true. Anyway, so he was the first interview I did for this book. And,
Was he the first? I didn't realize.
yeah, and so I was a little nervous. I'd never been on the other side of the table, so to speak. And he was being very difficult. He didn't want to talk about basses. He wanted to talk about throwing a hat trick at the Oval. Right? He's the only musician ever did that. He wanted to talk about that. Anyway, we finally got around to enough about basses, and it was really a great experience for me. And it set me off interviewing some of these other chaps.
I was going to say, because obviously that was when you first started, and you said to me you were going to start doing the interviews and stuff. I mean, I think you obviously started enjoying it, but I mean, John Paul Jones came to his house. I mean, come on, unbelievable. Never was at my house. I mean, he's not allowed me in my house. But I mean, what was that like doing the interviews? I mean, was that fun for you eventually, or was it hard work, or was it?
It was really fun. I really loved it. You know, being in Rush, you know, we were pretty much a microcosm, and we were so small, like a small island amongst ourselves. And so it was great to get out and talk to different musicians and learn more about their backgrounds. And to be on the other side of the table, so to speak, was really revealing and quite a rich experience for me.
Yeah.
And they were all such great people. I mean, John is a fantastic, lovely man. He wouldn't even let me pay for his taxi.
Wow.
That's a
Jimmy Page would have made you pay for this taxi. And he would have wanted sandwiches.
So I hear. No, they were all great people, and some of them were people I knew, like Les Claypool and Rob Trujillo, and others were just really interesting. But I didn't want to just pick famous bass players, because the book isn't really just about playing the bass, it's about collecting, and so there are a couple of lesser known characters that I interview that talk about really interesting aspects of what it's like to be a mad collector.
Yeah.
I found that was another way of sort of enlightening the subject.
So we talked, I'm lucky enough to come into your studio, and the last time I was there, you had a bass that was hanging up, and it was new, we just made it into the book, I think, and it was the Le Studio, because Le Studio, I'm sure you know, was where Permanent Waves was made,
right.
Pictures was made, I think, wasn't it?
That's
a
right.
whole slew of very successful albums. And can you tell that story, because I loved it, because you told me that story, and I got a bit weepy.
Oh, you did?
I did, and I'm a hard guy. I was quite fun.
Tough egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very sweet thing. The people that now own the studio, or what's left of it, the studio burned down. We did a number of records there, as most of you guys might know, and some of our biggest records there. But the studio there was a fire and it burned down, but the door to the sound room survived the fire. And this chap sent a bunch of the wood from that door to Fender and to the custom shop, and they fashioned both of them into a bass for me, a guitar for Alex, and drumsticks for Neil. So I thought that was really quick.
It's so cool. It's so cool.
Scribbles that you make while you're waiting for the take, and you're pissed off.
Yeah. And it's on the headstock, it's got the studio kind of imprint kind of
Yeah,
into the thing.
yeah, they burned in the logo for the studio. So, I mean, that's a modern piece, but there's a lot of love in that piece, so I really appreciate it.
And in that way, you just talk about incidents that have history, that has got so much history in a way, do you know what I mean? Because it's
a different kind, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rush history, yeah.
Yeah.
Where so many of the other instruments are survivors of decades and decades. And that, to me, that's what's so interesting, like when you look back at a Fender from the early 50s and you think about, well, what did Fender really do? Well, you know, he sort of created a kind of mass production. It was really the first commercially available electric bass. In 1951 he came out with this precision bass, and you just imagine what it must have seemed like to these guys that were playing double basses in bands, traveling around the country, schlepping this big thing with them, having to tie it on the roof because it didn't fit into most of the vehicles of the day. And suddenly here's this thing that has frets in it, which meant it was actually in tune. You could tune it very precisely, hence the name. And also the portability.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about all those things and then tracing the evolution, because I'm a bit of a nut for understanding the thing. And one of the things...
So a bit of the nut is an understatement, just when it comes to things.
So, when it came to my instrument that I was playing at that moment, which was the jazz bass, I wanted to understand how it had evolved, for example, from the first jazz bass in 1960 to the one I was holding. Like, how did it get from there to here? So I just set out to get one from every year and play them back to back to back to back with my tech Scully, and we would analyze the pickups and analyze the neck, and it was really...
The days must have flown by.
Yeah. The months went by, the dollars went out the window.
We aged, autumn came.
I learned a hell of a lot
Yeah.
about the thing that, you know, that I loved, the thing that I was working with, and it introduced me from there to other different brands, and some of which that I had never really considered using, like, for example, Gibson Thunderbird. I'd never played a Thunderbird, although I had some pals like Pete Way and Pete Overend Watts, who played for What the Hoople. And I used to think, wow, what odd, really weird-looking instruments those are, and they sound kind of weird. I remember talking to Pete and asking him, Pete, how do you describe yourself?
You can do your Pete Way.
This is my Pete Way. He said, Glee, call me Glee. Well, Glee, see, my sound is 3/4 good and 1/4 not very nice.
I knew that was coming.
So, I never imagined I would use that instrument, because I watched Pete play it so many times, and I even watched him fall off the stage holding it more than one time. But now I'm in love with them because because I don't have the pressure of the context of my own sound. I can appreciate them more for what they are.
Oh, they are.
And even on the last tour, I decided that I was going to take 27 of these instruments out, and I was going to try to get one in every song and see how they would work in the context of Rush. And
that was. Can I say? If any of you were lucky enough to be on the R40 tour, and it was quite magnificent. But every time you looked up, Geddy had changed bass. And I was Scully, your tech, and he's not what I call a happy man in any way, shape, or form. Hi, Phil. Hello, Scully. How are you? How did he take to that?
He was very busy.
Yeah, he was.
Very, very busy. I think he loved it, frankly, even though he was working really, really hard. But it was really quite interesting. But I tried this Thunderbird that Pete had used all those years, and a number of other great players like Martin Turner from Wishbone Ash. He was a Thunderbird guy. And I tried it in the song Animate. And I was really surprised that it worked really well. And one extra bonus was, you know, my sound is usually pretty bright. You know, it's got a lot of guitarishness in it. And it always is difficult to mix Rush because my sound has a lot of top end. Alex's, obviously, guitar has a lot of top end, and Neil plays a lot of those cymbally things. And there's a real argument going on in the mid-range. So it's a bit of a fight to get the mix just right. But when I used this Thunderbird in that particular song, I realized I can have it quite loud, but because it didn't have that kind of top end, it didn't get in the way.
Okay.
So I traded off top end for volume, which is always good for a bass player.
What did actually told of Alex and Neil, God bless them, what do they think of the book? Have you had any feedback? Especially from Neil, who is of course a writer as well.
No, who cares?
These people might get it, you're like, I know. Who gives a shit about those guys?
No, I can't. They've been amazingly supportive, of course. Neil thinks it's an incredibly extravagant book, but he loves that I did it. And Alex was kind of blown away when I gave him a copy of it. He said he sat up till 3 in the morning reading it. He couldn't put it down. I was like, "How high were you?"
Pretty fucking high.
Reading about the bass. Anyway, he's been lovely and very supportive, and you know, I'm really lucky to have these guys as my friends still, because we just are very close and always will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, in terms of obviously the book here, I mean, this is a strange and hard question for you, I'm sure, but if you had to take one bass away to the desert island, what bass would it be?
Man,
This could take a while.
that's so hard, because I love so many different ones for different reasons, but I think if I could only have one, it would have to be my 62 foam green jazz bass, because it just is my new favorite thing to play.
It's such a nice colour as well.
Yeah, but you know,
Sorry, that's the kind of guy I am, yeah.
I know you're all about
Isn't it?
looks, Phil Wilding, but it's such a great bass to play, and if you can only have one bass, it better be the one that plays your favorite, right?
Well, let's talk about that bass, because you ended up playing with Yes at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You played that bass, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
You played the Roundabout.
I did.
How did that go for you?
That was really fun. It was scary at first,
I was gonna
because
say,
that's
yeah,
not
you
exactly
loved
the
Chris Squire,
easiest
didn't you?
bass song.
Yeah.
And Chris Squire was such a massive, you know, I was such a fan of his. He was really an icon to me, an inspiration. And I thought it was so tragic that Yes had taken so long to get Yes in the Hall of Fame, and he wasn't around to see it. And I got word that the band really wanted me to, you know,
Do Roundabout.
yeah, play that song.
The Show Me Off song.
Yeah, so it was a thrill, because Roundabout may be one of the great bass songs ever
Yeah.
written, and
Yeah.
bass-driven songs. So I really practiced a lot.
Talk about, can we just go to one of your other loves, baseball. You've seen it on the internet, I know. Talking about nerves, your team, of course, is Toronto, the Blue Jays.
Yes.
Who were awful this season. But you threw out the first ball, didn't you? Talk
did,
about
one
this
game,
obsessive kind of practicing thing. How long did you practice before you went out onto the pitch and threw the first ball?
Well, I threw for a solid hour before I threw out the first pitch, and I brought my glove with me because I was practicing. And usually when someone throws out the first pitch, they're standing in front of the mound and they just throw it out. But I had my glove, I was prepared, and I threw a perfect strike. And it was like, that's it. It's like it was a drop the mic moment. I'm done. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. No, it was really fun. It was really a big thrill.
No, that's it, because I know I've been to baseball with you, and it's something you absolutely adore. While I sit there going, what's happening now? Did you win this one? You always go, no.
No, you know more than you pretending to know.
I just said,
no, it's a great game, and anyway, they didn't come here to listen to
they
baseball.
love baseball. Look at them, to a man and
They don't want to
woman.
hear about baseball.
So let's talk a bit about music, because I'm sure you want to hear about that. I know the space plays here as well. My favourite Headache, great solo album.
Thank you.
I love Victor too. Don't tell Alex, but I thought it was a
I
great
won't tell them.
But musically, what's going to happen with is it going to be My Favourite Headache Part 2? Part 2?
I couldn't say at this point. Right now, I'm shamelessly promoting my book.
He is.
Until I cannot do that anymore, and then
You can do
I'll
both.
figure it out. Nah, I can't.
So let's talk a bit about, because obviously the photography in the book is a guy called Richard Sabol, who I met on R40. If you've never met Richard, and it seems unlikely, he lives in Vegas. He basically looks like the side of a house with a suntan. But no, seriously, you meet him and go, man, he does? That's weird. And like, so many teeth. But great guy. But his photography is exceptional. I remember once we were looking at the sheets of this book, and there was a shot of bass strings, and I was like, oh my god, that's beautiful. Richard's made bass strings beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean, tell me about working with Richard on the book.
Well, it was really great fun. I'd worked with him in the context of Rush. He had shot the band a number of times, and me for some magazine stuff. But he comes from a product photographer. He'd been a portrait photographer. He'd worked with this well-known Canadian photographer, Edward Bertinsky. He'd worked learning how to do prints with him. And, I mean, really an incredibly diverse background. And we did some test shots about a year before we ever started the book.
Okay.
And I had a lot of confidence he'd be able to do it. And so my wife, unknowingly, volunteered her art studio, which is on the 3rd floor of my house, to be our photo studio. And so Richard went up there and basically disassembled her room and built 4 different areas for shooting instruments and hung around there for about 4 months. No, 8 months, more like 8 months, sorry. So eventually I was getting this, you know. Is Richard finished yet? So 30,000 photographs later.
Is that how many it was?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
That's how many we started with before we whittled it down to a mere 1,100 that are in the book.
Wow, it's 1,100.
Something like that.
I haven't counted, I'll be honest.
Me neither.
But no, but like I say, there's something about Richard's photography he can. Yeah, I mean, he's a great live photographer, but when he does the soft still work, it's absolutely magnificent, isn't it?
Yeah, no, he's enormously talented. And you know, I worked on this book with a dear friend of mine, Daniel Richler, who has been a very successful broadcaster in Canada for many years, and he's written a novel of his own and many magazine articles. And he was the guy whose job it was to help me wrestle with words and try to get my, you know, my sense of personality across in the book, because I really wanted this book to be a conversation, sort of like what we're doing now, just talking about basses and talking about music and talking about my past, and trying to tie them all together. So he was invaluable in that regard, and he lives in Britain now, so we were back and forth across the water, which was a great excuse to come over here quite often.
Yeah. And he's got a good haircut too.
He's got a haircut a lot like yours.
It's a lot like mine, bizarrely.
Why are you saying that?
Geddy's friends only have haircuts like this, so think on. What was the most gratifying thing about the book? Was it finishing it? Was there one moment, because I like novels, you may not know that, but there's usually a moment in the book where I kind of know I've got something, that I have something. Was there a kind of eureka moment with this?
No, not really. I didn't, you know, I knew it would be beautiful if I pushed hard enough and worked at it long enough. But it was a lot of work, and it was quite an interesting learning experience for me. At one point, when we first sent the manuscript into our editor, she said 3 things to me. She said, number 1, I've never received a manuscript that was 845 pages before.
Whoa.
Number 2, I love the way your passion for the instruments play out on the page. And number 3, which made me most happy, is I didn't expect it to be funny. So that was a nice thing for her to say. And, but taking it from so many pages down to a mere 408 was really an education. And I literally at one point moved into the offices of HarperCollins in New York and spent 2 weeks with the staff, you know, learning how to edit down a book. So it was good fun for me. It was really, you know, new projects, new interests are so good for your brain, they're so good for your personality, so I really enjoyed that.
And I was going to say, and you know, you mentioned the R word, Rush. When that all finished, when you knew it had finished, because I know for a while we talked and you were saying, you know, there was a possibility something was going to happen, and then eventually was the acceptance that perhaps it wasn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. Was this important that you did this book then? Was it that you were like, I need to kind of move on to something else, a bit of closure, but something new, something beyond Rush? Was that important?
I think it was very convenient. Because, you know, I won't lie, it was a difficult transition for me at first, because, you know, when the tour ended, I was still raring to go, and I was very proud of the show, and I was...
It was a great show.
A little unhappy I couldn't bring that show to Europe and the rest of the world. I'm sorry about that.
Madam, please,
I did my best. But it wasn't meant to be, and of course we did hold out hope that perhaps after a short time off, maybe
You come back.
minds would change and we would be able to mount a tour elsewhere, but it didn't happen. So that's life, and that's fine. And so this came along at a good time for me. So because being obsessive, it absorbed me and kept me off the streets, so to speak.
Yeah. You almost. How long did it actually take? Was it 2 years?
It's about 2 years. Yeah.
That's a fairly long time to do. I could say that my books take about 3, but still.
Right.
But I mean, did you plan for it to be that long, or was it just this will be done when it's done? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I was really pushing to have it done quickly because I didn't want to, take up so much time. But it just, the book finds a pace of its own.
Yeah.
Every project you do finds a pace of its own, and like in Rush, when we finish a mix, it's never really finished for me, and they literally have to drag it out of my hands because I could fiddle with it forever. This one was a little bit like that, but at the end of a mix, I'm always looking at its flaws, and all I can hear are the things I didn't do the way I wanted to do them. But strangely, when I finished this, I was really pleased with it. So, so I'm quite happy that people are responding to it, and I'm quite proud to bring it around the world and have an excuse to talk to you folks.
Yes,
it's kind of a good thing.
Was there any point in the book where you thought this is hard? And I thought, was there like a block? Did you have a moment where you thought this isn't working where I want it to work? Because I know that happens in albums a lot as well, doesn't it? You kind of sometimes hit a joint and you're like, this is not moving the way I wanted to do. Or was it quite an easy job to do?
Yeah.
Did it flow?
I didn't. I just felt a little overwhelmed at a certain point.
That's 1,100. How many photos?
Sorry?
How many photos did you take?
1,100 photos, but I wanted to do justice to the history of these various brands, and getting the facts right was really difficult.
Yeah.
Because there's so much misinformation, which also underscored the need for a book like this to me, because there was no one compendium about the electric bass and its beginnings and all the various brands. So the more frustrating it was in terms of finding information, the more I felt determined that this book would be a good reference book for some people.
Yeah. What's the next book going to be about?
This really small, slippery book of synthesizers.
I'm going to say yes. You can do a pamphlet on bass pedals. This is one I bought in London. Hold on, we should check the time. Where's Meg?
I think we should hear from these folks.
Yeah, should we head to the Q&A now? I think I've talked enough. So I can't even see the audience. Can we do something with the lights?
There's hands up. I see some. Yeah, there you are.
Yeah,
hi guys.
Any of you got a question for Mr. Lee? Put your hands up. Let's go. I'm going to say you in the corner. You? Yeah? You?
Yeah.
I think this person will do your mic.
You get the lovely mic.
Yeah, don't ham it up.
Thank you. Hi, Geddy.
Hi.
Welcome to England, home of the wall bass guitar.
Yes.
I'm a really big fan of your wall era. I think it's some of the most inventive.
What's that?
Wall bass.
Is that the one without the head?
Keep on.
Is that the one without the headstock?
No.
Oh, sorry. That's the one I really didn't like.
It's an English name. Carry on. He's interrupting.
Thank you. It's one of the most interesting bass tones and parts that I've heard, and I was disappointed not to see the bass on the R40 tour. What was the reason for not using it amongst all the others?
Thank you for the question, first of all, and the walls are well represented in this book. And they're beautiful instruments, and I discovered them when I was working over here, recording Power Windows at a studio called The Manor in Oxford. And Peter Collins, our producer, owned a wall bass, and all I'd really known of them before was that Percy Jones of a band called Brand X, who I really liked a lot. He played one, and he was really an amazing bassist. And so I was having trouble getting a sound for the song Big Money, and Peter said, well, why don't you plug this one in and see what it sounds like. And it had really thin gauge strings, thinner than the strings that I use. And we plugged it in, and we got a really good noise out of it, as they say. And it worked great for the song, and I use it on a few more songs on that album. And then I decided I wanted to go visit the folks that made them and asked them to make me a bass, and that's how sort of my love affair with those basses started. And I used them for a few years, but then I was restless in the tone I was after. You know, I was always experimenting and then moving away from it, you know. It's just like songwriting for me. I just can't sit still, you know. I have to keep trying some different thing or work on some different thing. So to me, the wall basses were a period of time, and once I sort of went back to the Fender sound, the sound that I had developed with the jazz bass, it kind of was more meaningful to me, so I just stuck with that. So I had so many vintage basses that I wanted to bring out on that tour that I kind of forgot all about the ones that are in between, like the Walls and the Steinbergers, because they're not quite vintage, yet they're still fine basses, so no slight intended.
It's the Steinberger's got no head, isn't it?
It's got no head.
That's the bit I knew. Let's come to the middle here. That young lady there. Hello. They'll give you a mic. No head.
So basically, it's kind of a weird question. I've got two questions. First of all, has Alex got any plans to write a book or anything? Because he's the only one that's not written a book now. And this is kind of weird, but why do you not like the song Tai Shan? Because I really like that song. I really like it. Also,
It's gonna be like that.
Wow. Take her out. Take her out. Take it out.
can I just say I love you matching
Meet
denim
you
jackets
afterwards.
as
We'll
well?
arm wrestle about Tai Shan. Well, I have no idea if Alex is going to write a book or not. He is the funniest human being alive, so I would expect at some point he will write something very funny. I can't speak for that, though. As to Tai Shan, it's just one of those songs that Alex and I like to make fun of. At the time I was singing it, I wasn't standing on a mountaintop. So because it was such a personal song for Neil, and it was such a great moment for him, Alex and I had a hard time putting ourselves in that moment. And guys in bands really need all the ammunition we can get to make fun of each other. So it just sort of landed on Tai Shan. So I recognize that some people love that song, and I don't feel as harshly about it as I make out. But it's really a good reason to kid Neil. You know?
So you're saying China didn't sing to you? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've never been there, have I?
Then clearly Niels did.
But thanks for the question.
Let's go over there. Gentleman with the glasses. Is there somebody with a mic on this side? Just over there. Stand up, sir. Unless, of course, you can't stand up and have an awful thing to say.
I'm not sure.
That's being
We
empathetic.
wouldn't know anyway. Quick question, Geddy. Order of Canada or Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which means most to you?
Good question.
Oh man, it's
Like Tai Shan.
fair. It's really country or career. Is what you're asking. I love them both equally. How's that? I'm wearing mine right now. There it is. See, that's my little Order of Canada thing.
I think they're turning on you again. Let's move up the back a little bit. Somebody's holding up something there. Yeah, wave. Yeah, to there, please. Thank you. Sorry, the lights are so weird.
Hi, Geddy.
Hi.
Thanks for...
What am I, chopped liver? You're not speaking to me? No, I'm just...
Two questions very quickly. Are there any songs in the Rush back catalogue of all the albums that you'd like to, that you kind of wish you could go back and redo with a particular bass that's in your collection now?
Oh God, you know, probably. The longer I look, the more I would find. But something, it's funny what happens in time. When you finish a record, as I alluded to earlier, you're very, I'm a sort of harsh judge at a record I've just finished. And then you go through this period where you go, oh, you've taken a month away from it and you're out on tour and you're learning the songs, you hear it on the radio, you go, oh, that was better than I thought it was. And then time, you know, travels at quite an alarming rate. And for me, when I look back at the very old stuff, I hear things that I couldn't possibly have heard about those songs. So when I look at the earliest records, you know, of course there are a few things I would rather have redone at the time, but you can't change the past, and I tend to appreciate it more than I thought I would. I don't know if that answers your question. So, but there's very few I would really go back and change again, because I don't think that's the way it works.
And the second thing I wanted to ask you is is there anyone I could leave my email address with in the hope that you might one day sell some tourist pedals?
Sure, you can leave it with this young lady. I'm sure she will make sure I don't get it.
Let's go back to the middle. Let's go a bit further back. You there with the hat on? Yeah. Just. God, it's so hard to see. I do apologise. You're wearing a hat indoors. What are you, mental? No offence to you.
Bored. Right, 4 years ago tonight, you were using a Thunderbird bass fitted with a friend of mine's bridge, the Scott Danson Blackbird bridge. How much of a difference does that make to the intonation of the Thunderbird?
It made a huge difference. You know, Gibson bridges, now no slight intended, but it must be said, that Gibson bridges are notoriously lame. You know, they're just very hard to intonate, especially to take the pressure of gig after gig, night after night, 3-hour shows. So I really don't understand why they didn't develop a better one sooner. They just got it in their head that that was their bridge, and they're going to stick with it. And so the Thunderbird bridge, we had a lot of trouble in rehearsal tuning it properly and having it stay in tune. And, you know, I sweat quite a lot, and I'm pretty brutal with my instruments, so that didn't help any, but that Bad Bird bridge that you're talking about really solved it. I mean, it's a great, really great bridge, so perfect for that instrument.
I didn't understand one bit of that.
When you smile, you know.
You nice line, yeah, glee. Let's go back over this side. I was going to say to the gentleman in a Lush t-shirt. Oh, sorry. Are you then the bassist t-shirt? I'm assuming you're the bassist. Stand up, please. Thank you.
Give it a go.
Oh, you didn't go. That hit me on the arse. Sit down.
Right, I'll stay silent. So you mentioned that you collect a lot of basses, a lot of vintage basses. Now with more sort of a mass-produced system of basses, do you prefer to pick up mass-produced basses and tweak them to your own liking, or is it a case of you kind of avoid more recent popular basses and just go for the more traditional?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point you bring up, and people ask me about this because almost every bass player in this book has moved away from vintage basses into their own brand that they've sort of designed with these new luthiers, right? The new wave of modern luthiers. I'm not there yet, and maybe I'll never be. Probably I'll never be, because I've become such a freak about the past and about vintage instruments. I certainly appreciate everything that's been done to use modern technology to perfect intonation and to perfect the tone and the treble pickups and the detail that you can get out of some of these new instruments is quite remarkable. And I go online and watch young players all the time, and they really are born to these instruments, like the 5-string and 6 strings, and they're all over the place. Their facility blows me away, but it just ain't me, you know. For me, I like the sort of imperfection and the mojo of the older vintage basses. And in fact, I'm going back pre-65. I find I use basses that are before 65 more often than I ever use a bass after 65. Yeah, I'm just a different cat in that regard, but I take your point. They're making some incredible things right now.
Yeah, no idea. Let's go up this side. Let's move towards the back a little bit, because those people are there feeling lost. Gentleman in the corner there, with the arm in the air very excitedly, with is that a flannel shirt?
Yes, you.
I didn't find the punk goes for you to wear a flannel shirt. Nice.
All right.
Hi, Geddy.
Hi.
Just wondering if you could go back to any tour at all and play any bass guitar. Has this been asked once? No. if you go back, you know, age regardless, whatever, if you go back to any tour and redo that tour, with any bass at all, which tour would you like to go on?
Wow, gee, I don't know. Probably the one where I played the Steinberger.
No head.
No head. And now I know a lot of people like Steinberger basses, and I recently had this discussion with Tim Comerford from Rage Against the Machine, and he's a wonderful guy and great bass player. He loves the Steinberger, and he doesn't understand why I don't use it anymore. But I went through a period with that instrument that was sort of out of necessity because, I don't know if you recall my rig at that time, I had keepers to the right of me, keyboards to the left of me. You know, they were everywhere, and I had mics hanging on either side of me. And invariably, every time I turned around with one of my Rickenbackers, whack, I would smack one of these microphones or hit a note that wasn't supposed to be hit on the keyboard. So I was motivated to the Steinberger out of a sense of practicality. And when I did Grace Under Pressure, I had a lot of trouble getting a sound I wanted in the recording of that record. And I played it for the subsequent tour, and it just, in the end, wasn't satisfying enough for me, so I went away. So that's when I would, to answer your question earlier, if I could re-record Grace Under Pressure or replay that tour, I would definitely love to play a jazz bass on those songs. But anyway, I hope that answers what you're looking for.
Hello. Let's go. I can't go for that. Yeah, you there with the glasses on, with the hands in the air. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you stand up?
Hello.
Oh no, different guy. I wasn't pointing at you, but you can have your turn. Go on. You look like Geddy Lee. That's so weird. Do subdivisions. I like that one. Hi, Geddy.
Hi.
Hi, Phil. Thank you. Good to see you again.
I kind of wanted to sort of ask, because we all hear a lot about how your sort of bass playing has evolved over the time, but it's actually more to do with how you've sort of developed your singing voice over the years and how you've kept it across those 40 years and made it match with all the different albums that you've tried out. How have you managed to do that?
Well, when I first started singing, it was sort of out of necessity because no one else wanted to do it. Again, that old chestnut, right? And we were playing at quite a dense and feverish tempo, and our music was really loud, and so I developed this musical style to cut through. And on through the 2112 years, the music got more complicated, more intense, and my voice got higher and higher and higher. And in those days, we wrote without any consideration for what key we were playing, because we would usually write songs sitting around a hotel room after opening for somebody else, or sitting around the studio 10 minutes before we're supposed to record the song. And so we would write the music and then save the vocals till the end, and then I would just sing it, whatever key it was in. And that sort of came to a head when we did Hemispheres, because we wrote the whole album in Wales, in Monmouth, Wales. And we spent months recording it in that studio, and then moved to London to finish it off at Advision, and then eventually at Trident Studios. And when I went to do the vocals in that song, it was so high, it was so difficult for me to sing. It was 2 weeks of hell for me in the studio. And I swore from that point on, I would check what key I'm singing before I write a song. And it really wasn't until Peter Collins came into the band that he really helped me understand how to use my voice differently. And I sort of dedicated myself through the Peter Collins years, and that's one of the big reasons I worked with Rupert Hine, was he was so good working with singers. He worked with such great singers through his whole career. And I learned a lot from those guys about songwriting and nuance and how to use my voice in a different way and how to make it more, ready, mellifluous.
Round of applause, please.
Anyway, those guys really helped me evolve. And from that point on, I became very aware of what key I sing in, what are the lyrics doing Are they helping my vocal? Are they arguing with my vocal? And this brought up a really good point in terms of collaboration. I've been blessed to work with one of the greatest lyricists that one could ever collaborate with, who has no ego when he comes into the room with you. And so he could present a song to me, and if I say to him, look, I can't do much vocally with this because there's so many words in such a short period of time that I'm really just reciting very quickly. So he started evolving his style around my vocal requirements. And we would go back and forth quite a lot with every song he wrote from that period forward. And in fact, sometimes when he would send me lyrics, and Alex and I were working on some music, there might be only 4 lines in a song that he'd written that really work vocally for me and melodically for the song. And Alex and I would send him a tape of that and send it back to him, because by this time he was living in California. And he would rewrite the song around those 4 lines. And he was just happy to have written it, you know. So, you know, all those people I'm mentioning now have contributed to me developing as a singer. And none any less than Neil adapting his writing style. So that's a long-winded answer, but I hope it answers your question.
Nice, I like it. Let's move on back a bit because, you know, we've got to get out of here. God bless you. No offense. Let's go over there. I almost keep saying somebody in a blush top, which is such a stupid thing to say. That gentleman there in the blush top. Yeah, you there in the white top.
White shirt.
Yeah, white shirt.
Evening, Geddy.
Hi.
Silly question. Home on the Strange. Who is the Canadian icon?
I can't remember now. It was like 400 years ago.
He sleeps with his clothes on.
You know, that song is a bit of a comic joke about one of the guys that I worked with in that studio. He was a real character. He was one of the assistant engineers. And we needed one more song for the record. And I was tired of working on these, you know, sort of complicated string arrangements with Ben Mink. And there was so much arrangement going on that record. We just said, let's just write a song off the cuff, put it on the record. And I was inspired by this oddball character who was working in the studio with me. And he was, we made out like he was a Canadian icon, but he was a particular kind of Canadian that most Canadians know. You know, your average guy, kind of what I'm getting at. So thank you. That's an obscure question. I appreciate it.
We've got time for one more question, and for that I apologise. So let's go to the back. I apologise to those at the front. Let's go over there, the gentleman on the aisle, just there to your, yeah, just you, yeah, thanks. Start with that one.
Hi Geddy.
Hi.
What advice would you give to an aspiring musician who's trying to break into the music industry today?
Well, the most important thing, of course, is always take your wallet on stage with you. I have mine right here. You know, there's no real secret to success. It's really all about playing. You know, young players ask me all the time. I can only say play, 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 write, write, write. The secret to creative expression is your ability to write. I don't consider myself to be the fastest bass player or the most musically knowledgeable bass player, but I was able to develop my own voice, and a lot of that has to do with being part of a writing team. So when you are writing the songs, you are inside the music, and you learn a way to express your playing melodically, and that sets you apart from the next guy. So the more you write, the better you get at writing, and you combine that with your facility, and away you go.
Easy. Yes, we are. So now then, who would like to fist bump Geddy Lee?
Yay!
Bloody right. Now then, just a few things with the book signing. We're going to do it blow by blow. You're going to come up here one at a time. Always, when Geddy signs your book, you'll get a moment to chat, look him in the eye, tell him you love him. It's nice. It's a sweet, sweet moment. You'll never forget it. Or you might. And then don't close the book immediately because it's a glossy pen on a glossy page. And if you close it, it looks like the Sharsh test. You get very upset. People go, I've got Geddy Lee to sign my book, and he just says, "Gluh." So hold the books open.
That is my signature.
I never see your signature. Your signature's just Glee. Glee. So we're going to go by go. You're going to come up here one at a time. These people will. This gentleman with the glasses. Your name again? I know. David. My best buddy mate, Dave. Dave, the Dave stuff. Dave will help organise you. So it's going to be one vote at a time. So take your time.